Joining me now, Dave Weigel from the Washington Post. He is one of the better reporters covering the campaign, so we'd like to check in with him from time to time. Dave, welcome back on the Young Turks, brother.
Oh, good to be here, man. Thank you.
All right, so Dave, just a fun thing to get started, and then we'll get to some serious issues. You remember when we had breakfast in Iowa, and you asked me who do you think is in the best shape right now? Who I said was in good shape? I don't know if you remember.
I remember the eggs. I'm not sure if I remember. I thought it wasn't Bernie. I remember it being that you thought Bernie had a base, but it was somebody else.
Yeah, it was Kamala Harris.
That was it. Okay.
Yeah.
I should have guessed Kamala, but then you would say no, and I'd be kicked off the show forever. Yeah. But I remember you worrying that the real progressives, the people with the records, were not in the best shape, and someone else was. So you said Kamala.
Yeah, well, fortunately or unfortunately, it looks like that might be coming to fruition.
Right.
CNN poll out now that has her in second place. Man, that was a giant jump. So actually, let's start by talking about that. So the first debates happened. Elizabeth Warren wins the first debate according to all polling by a landslide. And then Kamala Harris wins the second debate easily as well. Warren, but most of the polls won by a larger margin, but she had less competition in the first debate.
Right.
But what has happened since then in the polling is interesting. Kamala Harris has risen in all polls, but Elizabeth Warren has remained flat. I have a theory on that I wanted to bounce off of you. It is that it wasn't the debates themselves, but the media coverage afterwards that so emphasized that exchange between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden on busing that gave her the lift. What do you think about that?
I think that's true, and I think the Warren campaign was worried about that. They thought she would do well in that debate, and she did. But it was pretty clear that the media story around that debate was going to be overwhelmed by whatever happened Thursday. And it could have been a triumphant Joe Biden performance. It could have been what happened. So they knew that she was going to get pushed out of the headlines for a little while. I don't detect a lot of worry right now. I mean, they've got good operations in all the early states, and they've not been declining. They also, if you look at the CNN poll, which has the most dramatic jump for Kamala, Warren jumped up too, and also Warren now has the highest favorable rating, favorable to negative rating of any Democrat, which was unthinkable a couple months ago. But she did not go into the debate with a conflict in mind, and Kamala did. And the media covers. I'm in the media. I hate those people who say the media is not part of it. We in the media cover conflict, and Kamala Harris created one, and it dominated the weekend.
So it's interesting because historically, the Democrats have been very conflict adverse.
Right.
The Republicans don't mind brawling, especially Trump, obviously in 2016. But the Democrats usually don't want to do it. But do you think that now that Kamala gets so much attention and a positive bump out of it, that the next debate might then involve a lot more conflict from other people?
I'm not sure if it's that simple. I think what happened to Kamala actually didn't have a lot to do with policy, didn't have a lot to do with her record leading up to the debate, which I think was hurting her. It was as simple as she looked like she could take on anybody because she took on Joe Biden, and he lost the round. He kind of ran out of words and gave up his time on time. I should say early. He gave up his time when his clock ran out when everyone else was talking over it. Just the dynamics of her standing up. No one who's voting in this primary had seen her in that situation before. And a big thing I hear in Iowa, New Hampshire, and all the early states is not so much I want to make sure they're right on policy. I want to make sure that they say this about Medicare for all, not that. It is, I just want to make sure they can beat Trump. So what happened over the course of that debate is that Joe Biden looked less and less like somebody you'd want going 3 rounds of 90 minutes each against Donald Trump. And Kamala Harris in that short moment did. So I do think it was driven more by the dynamics of how she looks on TV, how she debates, which is important. I mean, that is part of the job in the general election. I think it had more to do with that than anything she said versus Warren said. She also in the debate, I think, escaped a couple of sand traps that she's been hitting since the debate was over, mostly on Medicare for all.
Yeah, I actually want to talk about that because how much of it is the media responsible for straightening the record? So there's a couple of different issues in regards to that debate. So they did something that I thought was tipping their hand on it and definitely a little obnoxious. They had shirts made right after, like before the debate, ready to go, saying "I'm that girl," right?
Yeah.
Referring to the busing incident. Now that's okay. She planned it. You should plan things in a debate. I don't have a problem with that. but it does seem a little disingenuous when you've already got the shirts made. So, but it's a genuine question. How much responsibility does the media have to point that out more aggressively?
I think it was pointed out pretty well on Twitter, at least the night of the debate. I was in Miami. I know you were in Miami in the spin rooms too, and people were reacting. I think the second or third reaction when I was talking to colleagues about this was one of us saying, "Boy, they were sure ready with that shirt in a hurry." That's somehow how these debates works. I mean, one of the most powerful comebacks in a debate in televised history was Ronald Reagan's very, very scripted line to Walter Mondale: "I'm not going to make an issue out of my opponent's age, youth, and inexperience." Right? Totally fabricated. Everyone knew it was coming inside the campaign, and yet I remember it now, 35 years later. So I think, as a matter of theater, it was really effective. And as a reporter covering this, I think that theater should not be the most important factor in these debates, but it gets back to Joe Biden coming into this primary with a concept that he was the relatable, friendly, elder statesman of the party, your uncle, your grandpa, and that another Democrat would have trouble being as approachable, being as tough as Trump as he was. That was punctured during the debate. I think a couple days later, Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris and Julian Castro, to a smaller extent, all look like credible people who could debate Trump. Bernie Sanders, I think, because he wasn't in a conflict, didn't become part of that message. And that gets what I was saying before, what you were saying before, is that the press really does focus on who was going after who. You can imagine a different debate if people decided it was in their interest to attack to attack Bernie Sanders. A conversation would be totally different over the weekend, but it wasn't. Harris realized that it's for anyone to get a purchase in the debate to start climbing, they needed to take Biden down. And I think we've been referring to the polling over the past weekend. The most dramatic movement in CNN was with black voters. It's 35% support Biden, 20-something support Harris. That was a movement that, if it happened, was going to really shake up the whole theory of how Biden wins the nomination. She did so. So that doesn't mean she's going to win the nomination in a couple months. It does mean that she exposed Biden's weakness, and that really is going to matter.
Yeah, so now the shirt is a small indication. Let's go to more important issues. So she raised her hand on getting rid of private insurance and when Medicare for All came up. And then later, her team walks it back again, saying that she misunderstood. Now, there's almost no chance that she actually misunderstood, because the question was asked the night before. And a person so prepared that they have shirts ready with a one-liner that they already have planned isn't going to miss that there is going to be a question, or there could be a question, about whether you get rid of private insurance, just like they did the night before. So how much responsibility does the press have to point out that Kamala Harris is being completely disingenuous on that?
I think she's been pushed back on pretty strongly in all the interviews. I mean, people have known since really February, when she first did that CNN town hall and got the question about Medicare for all and private insurance. Since Jake Tapper asked it, people have known, follow up and follow up and follow up and see how far she's willing to go. Now, you and I both know that the Medicare for all implementation is a little more complicated than this. It looks a bit more like Australia, where Aetna, in 4 years after the bill became law, would exist, but Aetna would be providing supplemental insurance. The idea that this destroys literally everything in the insurance industry, not wrong. The idea that it disrupts a bunch of people's jobs, also not wrong. But that is something that some candidates, I think, are very comfortable talking about and litigating, like Bernie Sanders in support of it, like a John Delaney on the other side of it. And Harris is not, thus far, been very good explaining her vision for healthcare, what it would look like a few years after she took office, what fight she would take on, things of that nature. So I don't think that she's gotten a pass in the interviews. I think it just hasn't lasted past the interview. There's 10 minutes of a candidate talking to somebody. There's that answer. There's campaigns trying to blow it up on Twitter. She got bailed out, frankly, by Donald Trump Jr., because instead of talking about her answer over the weekend, Sunday shows and TV were talking about Don Jr. retweeting that she wasn't really black. This Alpha Theta who went to Howard. Something that was honestly not going to be a problem for her if she's the nominee. How much can the media actually do when the question's getting asked the answer is insufficient, but then something else gets covered. I don't know. I would defend the reporters who've been asking the question, though, because they have revealed that she is not as comfortable as Warren, as Sanders, or frankly as de Blasio in explaining what the future of healthcare would look like if they're president.
No, Dave, I actually totally agree with you. And this conversation has led me to think that, look, unless it's on a national stage and on video, the reporters are just gonna cover it when it happens, and they're gonna let it go because it's not their job to keep pressing. Or at least perceived that way. It's the job of the other candidates to press. Otherwise, it's not gonna get coverage. So someone has to have the guts to say, Kamala, you keep raising your hand in public, pretending to be progressive, and then turning around to reporters and donors and saying, don't worry, I'm not actually progressive. So if they did that, then it would get a ton of coverage, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, when you say candidates, that sounds like a job for Bernie Sanders or for Bill de Blasio or for Elizabeth Warren, or somebody who really does believe in implementing this, or maybe Mike Gravel on Twitter if he wants to go there. If they went there, I think it'd be covered in that sense. The issue here is that, and this has been true, and I'm not trying to say don't have the debate is silly, because debates move opinion. They move it in one direction or another. Sometimes you can't predict, but there is a debate over whether the health system can exist in a private market, as most Democrats believe, or whether you need single payer, whether the health insurance market doesn't make sense because of the way people get their health care. And if that debate is had in the Democratic primary, people are going to see different angles of this. The issue is that at the moment, and we're 6 months out from Iowa, most Democrats are comfortable saying, oh, well, if you want to just give me an option to buy into Medicare and you don't get rid of the system as it exists, that's fine. I mean, that is a position that a lot of people thought Warren was going to take coming into this. They thought that Kamala was evolving in that direction before the debate. But if pressed, I'm not sure if it's going to be a huge problem for them. I think that the candidates who expect, oh, if I'm a moderate, I'm running against Medicare for all, I'm going to get all the voters who don't love phasing out private insurance. I don't think that's quite it. I don't think voters, at least the ones I talk to all the time, are that black and white on how a policy is going to be implemented. So the way that Warren phrased it was interesting, that if they tell you they're not for this, that means they're not going to fight for it. The way that Kamala phrased it was a little more slippery, and the way that Bernie Sanders and Bill de Blasio phrased it was, no, I'm comfortable getting rid of that entire industry. So there should be a fight about that. It just is up to the candidates to have one. I mean, they're going to have another debate in 30 days, and if they want to go a few rounds on that, it would make sense to do so. A little bit hard in a 20-candidate race. They're also going to get a couple attempts. There's some healthcare forums that are going to be happening in Iowa in a couple weeks. There's people like me in the press who are going to follow up and ask these questions. And a little bit of it's theoretical, right? Because if they're president in 2021, Joe Manchin maybe still a senator. The Senate majority is not 60 seats. There are only so many senators signed on to Medicare for all as it is. Maybe the bill doesn't pass. Yeah. But I think you're right that the details of the debate have not been pressed the way they could be, and that is up to the candidates. I mean, there's only so many fact checks, only so many rundowns that you can do as a reporter with one candidate. Otherwise, they read something else in the paper about Donald Trump sending tanks to the mall or whatever he's doing. Yeah. So just quick comment on that, because if I got into the substance, this would never end. We're already past time. But I think that that it is incumbent upon the candidates to press, to delineate, because if you don't, I mean, you said slippery. And so if that's an issue for Kamala Harris, then they should let people know. If not, well, then you shouldn't complain that the press isn't giving it adequate attention. But now, just last things on Buttigieg. So Buttigieg says basically that they made a mess of South Bend. I think that's the only thing he's ever done, right? So yet, it's the only political job, yeah. Yeah, yet somehow it's being painted in the press as a win for Buttigieg. I kind of had to go like this, what? And again, look, so you're in the press, that's why I keep asking you about it. Is it incumbent upon the press? But to dive a little bit more in, so Jonathan Larson at TYT Investigates has now done 3-4 different stories exposing the massive racial issues in South Bend and the documents that show the cover-ups involved in those incidents, right? So shouldn't the New York Times, et cetera, dive in a little bit more instead of just saying, hey, he was really likable? Go, wait, why are African Americans upset in South Bend? What is the real underlying problem there? There have been reporters on the ground. John Larson's stuff's been really great. We have Wes Lowery from the Post, who has been an award-winning, Pulitzer-winning writer on Black Lives Matter and police abuse. Was in South Bend for a few days writing a story. I'm not sure who's there now. People are going to keep investigating that. I think where it hits the average Democratic voter, and where a lot of people have benefited without necessarily sounding great on how they answer a question, is you hear a lot people who want the opposite of Donald Trump, or they want a breather, a break from Donald Trump. And so where Elizabeth Warren has been succeeding is that she seems to have thought through all of her plans. When Bernie Sanders is succeeding, it's because he points out the ways that people who thought Trump was going to deliver them didn't. And where that answer for Buttigieg succeeded in the debate, saying, we haven't got it done yet. I think the Democratic voter who likes that says, I'm so sick of Trump pretending that everything's amazing, taking credit for everything that happens, denying that anything bad ever happened. Oh boy, wasn't it refreshing for somebody to admit blame and admit that something got screwed up. So you might look at that at home and say, but he just admitted his one big political job. He failed at something enormous over 7 years. But I think that is how the voters who looked at that and said, I'm satisfied, that is how they read it. And that's what I've seen a lot from people is, boy, I'm just so sick of the man in the White House and his ego. Isn't it refreshing to hear somebody talk in a way we can look up to or take responsibility? I think that is what benefited. I don't think that's terribly sustainable in a 20 candidate race for Buttigieg much longer, but that's how it landed last week.
Yep. All right, Dave Weigel from the Washington Post. Everybody check out his stories from the campaign trail. Usually the most thorough and into the details and policies. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Anytime, thank you.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.